Hi everyone. This is the video clips that I'll talk about the loop. The idea of the loop is like you have to work and you have to control the sequence of your program, like to make it repeatedly do something. So the idea of the loop, we can divide it into two categories. The first one is the loop that has just some conditions that you have to check every time in the loop. We call it every in iteration. So for each iteration, you have to check the condition. If still the condition is still correct, it's still true, you still have to work in the loop. If the conditions like you met stopping criteria, you can break from the loop. So this one we will use the while loop. And the other loop is if the you know in advance that how many iterations that you have to work in that loop, or you can use for loop. Or if you have some element in the list, some character in the string, you can use for loop. So I'll start working with the while loop. So guys, for the while loop, it's like you have to control it using the condition. For example, for example, you have to you want to read something from the keyboard, and when the input meets some criteria or meet the stopping criteria, you can break out from the loop. So I'll start with this loop, while and true. This is the loop that works infinitely, forever. So you start with something like S is input, and then if S is equal to -1, you have you can break from the loop. If not, do something. Like if you want to find, for example, this is the classic example. For example, you want to find the average of all inputs from the keyboard until the user enter -1. Uh, so the idea is you have to use sum of input to be zero first. Please don't use only sum. Please don't use only sum because only sum is a function. It is a built-in function of the list that if you apply sum of a list, it will find the summation of all elements in the list. So please don't use just sum, min, max, something like that. So for the variable name, if you want to use sum for something, please use sum of something. So, or it will like, so you can still use the function, the sum function. Okay, so next, you have to add the one that you get from the keyboard into sum of input. So you have to change it to int or float, depends on the condition of your inputs. For in this case, I'll change it to int. So the sum of input will be uh, the sum of all inputs from the keyboard. And then sometimes if you want to find the average, so you have to know the numbers of inputs that is not -1. So this time you have to n is n plus 1. So this is the construction of the loop. So uh, this is the structure that in the loop, in the loop, oh sorry, in the loop, you have the while or for, and then inside while or for, you must use the block of statements. The block of statements in Python is same as if you have to use block with the same indent. So all these five statements are in the loop. So while true, you have to do it forever, but you start getting it from input from the keyboard and check that if s is -1, just break from the loop, or else sum of input is this is compound statement is sum of input plus int of s. But guys, this one is you have to like sum of input is sum of input plus int of s. And if you want to write some kind of this statement, you can shorten using plus equal. We call it the compound statement. Sum of input plus equal. So it means that it is same as you write sum of input plus. Okay, so I make it shorter. Okay, so and you have n is n plus 1, same. This is actually n is n plus 1. Okay, so once you finish this loop, just print sum of input divided by n. Let's try running this program. So this is the first while loop that, okay, we'll do it forever, infinite, infinitely. And then get input, check that if it is -1, get break from the loop. And then sum of input plus int of s, and then count, increase n by 1. Okay, so once your program start, so you can write like 5, 6, 1, and then -1. So when it is when this condition, when you meet or s meets this condition is -1, it will break from the loop. And this is sum of input will be sum of input plus int of s. And this is n is n plus 1. This is the way that you can count the number of inputs. Okay, so this is will this program will find the average of all inputs. So this is the first program uh, that use the condition to check. We have to check the condition, and then if it meets some stopping criteria, it's break out from the. And guys, so in this case, we use like s to be the like control of the loop, right? So or you can rewrite this program that we have to work in this loop. We have to work in this loop while s is not equal to -1. So you can check while s is not equal to -1, because when s is -1, you break out from the loop, right? But before this loop, guys, before this loop, we don't have the values of s yet, right? Because s we will get s from the keyboard. So s we don't have s in this case. So guys, we'll start with s. Oh, sorry, I will use s to be the input here. Now we have s before we enter the loop, and we don't need to use this one. And then while sum of input, while s is not equal to -1, or add it to sum of s, n is n plus 1, and then because we use s to control the loop, so now we have to change the values of s using s is equal to input. So from the program in this cell, we can change it to more formal one. That is, while s is not equal to minus 1, we have to work in this loop, right? But we don't have s before we don't have the values of s yet before uh, we check this condition. So we have to get s from the keyboard before we enter the loop. So we have to get s from the keyboard and check that if s is not equal to 1, add it to sum of input, and then n is n plus 1, and then s is input to change the values of s. In the case that s is not equal to 1, it will sum of input is plus, or sum of input is sum of input plus int of s, and then n plus n plus n is n plus 1, and get the new input from the keyboard, store it in s. So guys, let's try this program. So this one will start with 1, 2, 3, minus 1. That's all. Okay, so this is correct, right? But this is maybe is not like not equal to 1. Maybe you, if you want to change the condition to while the input is still the positive or 0. So if positive or 0, it means that you have to check that if int of s is greater or equal to 0, you have you will work in the loop. It means that when you get minus 1, minus 2 from the keyboard, the one that is less than 0, it will break from the loop because you have to work while your input is greater or equal to 0. So this one is 1, 2, 3, minus 2. It will break from the loop and find the average of these number. Okay, so this is the idea of how can we use the while loop. And guys, I have some standard while condition. Like if you want to use while to count from for something like uh you have to work like 10 times in the loop. We have some standard idea like while I we start with I and we use I to control the loop. I started with 0 while I less than n, or maybe if you want some specific number like while is less than 10, you have to work in the loop like 10 times. So I is I plus 1, and anytime in the loop you put your program here. So this is a patterns that you can use while to control the loop by using like some specific number of iterations. So if you want to like input to get to get the keyboard 10 times, or in this case maybe 10 times is like too many, too much. So for example, I want to get input from the keyboard 5 times. I use some of input to be 0, but this time I use 5 numbers. So uh, I get it from the keyboard. S is input, and then sum of input plus equal int of s. That's all. So it will like repeat 5 times. This is the patterns that you use I to control the loop. You start I with by 0, and then while I is less than 5, and I is I plus 1. So this is the patterns of the program that you use I to control the number of iterations in the loop. So guys, this one is like for example 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And then this is 5 times already, right? 5 iterations. So finally, this one finished, right? So you can print a sum of input to check that. Okay, this is the summation of all inputs here. So now I think that this is while conditions. If you want, I'm going to conclude, like if you want to use the loop that use some stopping criteria, use some condition to break from the loop, you have to use like the patterns like this, while true here, work forever, and once you can find that, this is the condition that you have to stop or break from the loop, it will like use this condition and break, okay, or use that condition while is still in this condition is still correct, okay, and try to change the control variable. You use s to control the loop, so you have to change s. If you don't use s, or if you don't change the values of s in the loop, your while will work forever, infinite, or we call it infinite or infinite loop. Okay, so this is the second pattern, and the last one is once you know the number of iterations of the loop that you want to work in, or when you work in this while loop, you can use this pattern. Use the control variable. In this case, I use this one. In this case, I use I to control the loop. You have to start with I to be 0. I is less than the number that you want, the number of iterations that you want, and then I is I plus 1. So I is the control variable. You have to change the values of I in the loop. So guys, this is the while loop.